Welcome to another St. Olga interview. It's our third time through with Daryl James, SSP veteran. He was enlisted in the US Navy in 1999, where he served 7 years on Earth. And in 2003, he was stationed at RAF base at, say, Mawgan and recruited as a pilot in Solar Warden, which is the starfleet that monitors the solar system. So this interview is going to be about new memories and future intel, and also one of my biggest pursuits in the last year and a half regarding cloning sensors and body snatching is going to be the Vril lizards, of course. So it's going to be more about the minutia. So if you want fundamentals, you're going to want to go back to the older interviews. So let's start with the true origin of your, let's say, high strangeness, which is being strangled by the Goon, which was actually prior to the time loop, but it must have been after his.
Yes, that was I was coming out of the bar on base and I was drinking with this guy. I call him the Goon. He was a big British Army and shaved head, big guy. And what happened was this first class petty officer who gave me a hard time, he was actually the off-world German who, when I first got out of the density chair, he said, I should have you executed for what you did to my man when I poked the reptile in the eye. He wound up actually being executed. He went missing from the base because he was an off-world German. It was part of we caught him on our ship. He was sabotaging it. It was something, he had like a personal grudge against me because of that. And once that happened, everybody started to believe it. Like everybody started to believe the story on base. Who knew about it? Especially the Satanists. And that's what this guy, the Goon, was. He was like, worked directly, with harvesting of children and things like that. So yeah, after this first class petty officer went missing, everybody knew I was telling the truth. And he had it planned out that, he was going to strangle me, after we got out of the bar, when I had a buzz and everything. And he came up from behind me and, said something like, if you think you're going to kill me, or if you're going to kill me, I'll kill you first. Because it was like after I came back from the 20-year and back, that's how it worked. The time travel thing is confusing, but
I thought that was before you were enlisted, before you were recruited.
No.
Oh, okay.
This was afterwards. I was probably in the command for, I don't know, a year, maybe a year and a half. It was a 2-year command on Earth at St. Mawgan itself. And yeah, I was probably there for about a year and a half. And so, yeah, I had already come back. So, it was like, when I first came back, I was being tortured. I got to a point where I remembered everything. And I told them that I was going to kill them in the future. Like I pretty much just told them, like, yeah, I'm going to execute all of you in the future for what you do for, harvesting children. And so, yeah, he came up from behind me and said, if you're going to kill me, I'll kill you first. And he started to strangle me, choke me from behind. And he was a big guy. He partook in this, drug. So I was told by the XO, it makes you pretty strong. It gives it gives you a lot of stem cells and everything like that. It makes you pretty strong. And I heard in an English accent somebody say, drop him, put him down. And, I was kind of halfway. I don't know if you've ever been like blacked out before, in the sense of like not knocked out, but just choked, where it's like you can't move and everything turns black, but you can still hear things. And that's kind of like what it was. And he said, but he's going to kill me. And the guy with the English accent, he said, well, he hasn't killed you yet, has he? And he was actually like the personal guard for the executive officer and the commanding officer. The XO had me followed because he knew I was in danger. So this guy was pretty much following me around. If I left my room, he would pretty much follow me around, this guard. And he was, British Army as well. Or at least he wore the uniform of it. And I heard the cuffs go on, I heard the clicks. And then somebody else said, he had another person with him. And he said, is he alive or is he breathing? And he said, yes. And he said, take him back to his room. And I woke up in my room the next day, and I remember my neck hurt like from it. But it was just one of those things where I kind of blew it off. That happened a lot on this base, where it was just like, I don't know, things I didn't understand. I just kind of accepted it because there were so many strange incidents like this. And then I never saw him again. And the executive officer, the Goon, anyways. And the executive officer said that there's cells in the underground base, and he was locked up in a cell. And I asked if, what if he said he's going to be released once you go back to the States, to the United States. And I said, well, what if he, follows me? And he said he won't. And that was the last I saw of him.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that, at least in the case of the tall man that with glasses that was starstruck by you, that you met in that trip to Nottingham, that it was the case for him having already seen, let's say, your future feats, because otherwise, just 1 year or so into your program, he couldn't have been that starstruck. I would assume that he actually saw the future with you in it, then came back to Earth, and that's how come he was starstruck as early as then.
Yes, because I would have been, like, at that moment in time, probably still in the Dark Fleet, at that exact moment in time. So yeah, so he had to have come back and back in time, and been in the command at that moment. And that was a strange story in the sense of somebody knocked on my door, and I barely knew the guy. He was just somebody I saw in the barracks, and he said, "Hey, we're going to Nottingham. You want to come with?" And I said, all right. Like, it was just a strange thing. And I went, and yeah, it was me and that woman, April. And it was this guy with glasses, big, tall guy with glasses. And yeah, he was just staring at me. And he was kind of had this weird smile on his face. Everywhere I walked, he looked at me. And I asked the XO before I left the command, did you plan that? And he said, yes, we were worried about you. Like, we didn't know, we thought you were, suicidal. And I said, who was that other person, the tall one, that was staring at me? And he said, he's on your ship in Solar Warden. And I said, he was looking at me like I was famous. He said, on your ship you are. And, I said, he looked strange. He was looking at me strangely. And he said, how? And I said, I don't know, it's strange. And he said, show me. And I kind of like he had like this weird smile and would just stare at me everywhere I walked. And I didn't get it. And then he told me, yeah, I was kind of like, popular on the ship. I was famous on the ship, and that's why. And I'm not really sure why he was part of that whole vacation we went on to Nottingham, but I guess it was just to monitor me or watch me or something. I'm not 100%, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. So now let's move on to some of your new recalls. I heard that some fragments of your visit to a Japanese breakaway planet have surfaced.
Yes. I remember going to Japan, and it was or the Japanese planet, I should say, not Japan.
One of them.
The Japanese world, yeah. And I learned that the reason that the Germans didn't like tattoos, Robert told me this, and before I left, or when I was talking before I left, and I remember being told that at the very beginning, where the first class petty officer who was interviewing me before I even left for the program said, do you have any tattoos? And I said, no. And he said, good, the Germans don't like tattoos. And the XO told me it was because that the Japanese, they're off-world, like military, they're all basically like Yakuza. And they have tattoos from the neck down, the wrist down, the ankles. And I guess they betrayed the off-world Germans in such a good way that it impressed the reptiles. And they like a good betrayal as long as it's not against them. So they actually granted them their freedom because they thought it was such a good betrayal. They felt like they deserved their freedom. But yes, it was very, I remember women having dogs, small dogs, Japanese women having small dogs. I remember like, it was almost like that, like, holograms would appear in front of you to sell you things when you were walking around and things like, it was very I don't know, like cyberpunk kind of thing. It was lots of neon lights, lots of holograms everywhere you walked around in the city and things like that. So yeah, it was very. You would have images of like women just appear in front of you, and they would just speak in Japanese and trying to sell you different things. And that's kind of like how that world was. It was very hustle bustle. Yeah, and women having small dogs, small white poofy dogs, and things like that.
Did they have tattoos all the way from their neck to their feet?
Not the women, I don't believe, and I think it was only like the men who were actually in the Japanese, off-world military. I don't think it was all the men, just like the German world, they weren't all in, Dark Fleet. They were, a lot of them were just, citizens of this
Yeah.
world. The Japanese was the same way.
Did they have implants or because I'm guessing they were very heavily into technology.
Well, I mean, as far as like nanotech and things like that, lots of like beings have that. That's considered like universal ET tech. They consider that, and it's like something that everybody has. They have it in the sense of it's not AI necessarily, so it's not like something more like a negative force. It's something that's not as intelligent in the sense that if you have a bad injury, you usually have to go on a smart Glasspad and get it to target that area or something, while the artificial intelligence in the body kind of does it itself. It just knows. But you also kind of lose yourself in the AI when that happens. So, many ETs and off-world people, like they pretty much all have that. They pretty much all have like a technology, a tech in their body that helps them, live longer, healthier, run faster, smarter, things like that. They also, genetically augment in the womb. That's very common for all off-world beings to do things like that. So their offspring is a lot more intelligent. So I wouldn't say something like, really grotesque in the sense they were missing limbs or missing an eye or anything like that, but they just have the tech in their body. Like, and that's just something that's just normal for all ETs to have this, and all off-world people.
Mhm. And how do the off-world civilizations of humans look at Earth, and do they keep up with it, or and because I remember you saying that in the German fleet they actually somewhat like glorified the fact that you were in the Iraq War, so that must mean that they do keep tabs on it.
They kept tabs on it, yeah, and it was just kind of like a Rommel thing, the tank commander and the African campaigns in World War II. Yeah, I would say that definitely they keep up because a lot of them are on the world. As we would consider them spies, but they wouldn't consider themselves spies. And the doctor I saw, lieutenant, when I did my last physical before I got out of the military, I released out of that command. I remember I said something to him like a spy is a spy. And he said, "You don't understand. Like, we won the war. We're not spies. We're basically just in the United States Navy. Like, but we're, from a different world." And he said, "You're looking at it wrong." And yeah, I mean, so the general public, I mean, they may keep up. They did do things like read smart Glasspads, which would have current events, almost like a newspaper, things like that, and you would see people reading it, just out in town. So it was like a way to keep up. So I wouldn't doubt at all that they kept up with the different things that were going on with Earth. And the off-world German basically told me, that lieutenant, that doctor, he said that, we're helping you. Because I was kind of like, I had a bad point of view of the off-world Germans. I saw them as like traitors, kind of like to their own species, basically.
Anglo-Saxons, yeah.
Yeah, Anglo-Saxons, but just the people of Earth in general. And he said, we're helping you. So it almost seemed like there was a breakaway or
Within the
something.
breakaway.
Yeah, of the off-world Germans themselves, away from the Draconian Empire. That's what it seemed like he was telling me.
That's the case according to Johann Fritz. But about the German world, do you figure that them being stuck, let's say, for so many decades into the 40s fashion, suggests that civilizations that are on their own like that, so don't have these, variation of races, are they more static and less prone to, maybe even ascension or something?
Maybe Ascension, but I would say the reason they stay so static like that is because they're propaganda, they don't, it's kept to a minimal, you know, what they feel like the people need, while ours is kind of like, you know, fashion and things like that. People dress the way magazines tell us to, the way TV tells us to, the way movies do, and they don't really have that like we do. They don't have that. I consider it here like more like a negative kind of propaganda in a sense, and you know, and they just kind of got locked there in the 40s, and I think they actually went back a couple hundred years before the 40s to start their civilization. I remember hearing something about that. So, you know, their civilization was, you know, over 200 years old, and they were still kind of stuck, like you said, in this 40s. But it didn't seem stuck to me. It was just their fashion. They just kept their fashion, and there was no propaganda to change anything, so nothing changed. And I'm sure there's progressions in their society and everything like that, but minimal things like that, like fashion, it just kind of stayed the same.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any inkling as to what you're actually doing on the Japanese planet or any other planets for that matter? Because at one point, the EXO tells you that you've seen more worlds than him, so you must have seen a few.
Well, it was mostly negotiations, making peace, making different treaties, finding out. A lot of it for me was finding out how these people were trying to help Earth, trying to help us break away from this. Not necessarily Ascension itself, but just breaking away from this, you know, satanic society of. That's what a big part of it for me was, because unless we can get rid of this, what's going on in the underground caverns, it's going to be like an open wound that the world won't be able to heal from. And that feeling you get, you know, where this isn't right, this isn't fair, something about this doesn't feel good. It's because there's a lot of bad things, you know, happening in these underground caverns, and we're kind of connected in a way, you know, like all of us are connected. All human beings in a way are connected. And if there's some sort of massive suffering going on, even though if the people aren't aware of it, it's going to cause an open wound, you know, and until that wound is, you know, cleaned and dressed, we won't progress any further. And that's like what a big part. And people don't realize that we are all interconnected in a spiritual sense. And when atrocities like that are happening, we're not going to move any further into the future. We're not going to progress any further.
Yeah, well said. But at the same time, it's impossible for us to expect that we can altogether strip away all this habit of slavery and abduction and time looping. So I guess the most realistic, solution would be something along the lines of what you did to recruit your music teacher. And could you briefly cover that?
Yeah, I went to his home, and we had the ship, and we actually landed it in the backyard, and went through the fence and knocked on the front door, and he recognized me right away, invited me in, and I basically just told him, you know, I put out I said, this is a smart Glasspad, and I showed him, and I said, like, you know, these are showed them the different star constellations where I was living, and different ships. You know, you could pull kind of holographic images out and kind of show them everything. And I told them that I was teaching these people, you know, the Pleiadians, Taygetans, I was teaching their children music. And, you know, I needed help. I couldn't do this on my own because they all wanted to learn. They were fascinated by our classical music, classical art, everything like that. And I needed help. And I basically just told them that, you know, you're going to be basically a civilian contractor. You won't be hurt, you know, like, and I told them that when I first got in, I didn't know what I was getting into. You know, I was abused, I was hurt, and I didn't realize that. And I said, but I promise you that won't happen to you. And I asked them, and I told them about a 20-year and back program. And I said, you know, you'll go with us, you know, you'll do 20 years, and then you'll just awake and you won't remember anything. And he basically just said, can I call? You know, he wanted to make phone calls before he left. And I said, yes, he can. And he made some phone calls, and we left. And the craft was actually cloaked in the back of the ship, so you couldn't see it. It was cloaked. I mean, in the backyard, so you couldn't see it.
And at the same time, when you first woke up in your career return, you had amnesia. So there must have been that you had since recovered a lot of your old self identity and stuff.
Oh well, my past self. I mean, they were able to kind of like the Pleiadians. They call it like plucking it from your mind is what it's called, which is a more in-depth kind of telepathy, and it's kind of something that you have to give someone permission to do. Like more negative beings, they'll just do it, but you know they're more positive. So it's like something they have to reach inside, like deep into your mind, into your subconscious, and they teach you. They allow it to do you to do it to them. But it's something they will do during like interrogations and things like that. Like if somebody went, like when that first class petty officer, the off-world German, he sabotaged our ship. He was interrogated by, you know, he would have been surrounded by elders, by older ones who were very telepathic. He would have been in the middle, and they just would have basically kind of plucked it, what they wanted from his mind. You know, they only do it for things like, you know, for causes like that, but they won't go into some deep into someone's mind without, you know, their permission. And so yeah, that's how I remembered it. That's how I remembered him was, you know, they reached deep inside my subconscious and were able to retrieve these memories.
Yeah, because they're gifted at unleashing the past life memory, and you could say that that was kind of a past life for you. I mean, a past incarnation because you were actually in a clone body. But about this more peaceful recruitment, would you say that it's something you would even consider taking today for yourself?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, if I had the opportunity, I would. Yes.
Hmm. And it was your initiative. And do you think you did it other times and just don't remember, or?
I only remember that one time. Yeah, I only remember the one time. I mean, they did have basically civilian contractors, I guess that you would call it, that others would recruit and things. It wasn't all necessarily military, but yeah, that was the only time I really remembered it.
Hmm. You also were given a little gift at the end of your career return, in that having felt sorry for you, the person who, the technician who did the re-aging, gave you more bulk, made you more buff.
Yeah, um, I remember being in the pub when it was right when I came back, and you know everything, and I already noticed my body was bigger, and I went up to the one I call the goth, like you know, she was like a woman that wore like a pentagram. She liked me, and I was young. I was like in my 20s, and it felt like the next day to me, even though I missed Saturday. I lost Saturday. You know, I joined on a Friday night. It was Saturday early morning when I joined. I completely lost Saturday, and I woke up on Sunday, and I went to the pub, the local pub on Sunday, and I saw her there. And I started talking to her, and she looked freaked out. Like her eyes got real wide, and she just grabbed her drink and she walked away. And you know, because I told her in the, you know, that I was going to kill her in the future when I was being tortured. I was going to execute her in the future. And I had no memory of this at the time. And so I walked away from the bar and I saw that first class petty officer, like an overweight guy with a blonde mustache, blonde hair. And he was like laughing in the booth, and it was really strange. And he was saying like, "Oh, Aquino screwed you up." He said he shouldn't have done that to you. He said you shouldn't have poked the reptile in the eye, but he shouldn't have done that to you. And he said I felt sorry for you, so you know, I made you stronger. And he also said he improved my genetics, like my genetic strength, like my ability to gain overall strength in the medbed. He said how he was able to, you know, give me more muscle and improve my genetics in general.
And maybe
And
change your blood type, like you said.
well, I didn't get my blood type changed. I asked Robert if he would do that for me. Oh yeah, well, whenever I first joined the program, yeah, he did say that. He said, you're A positive. He said you're RH positive. He said, but we can change that. There's something that ETs don't like about, you know, the having the RH positive, and you have to be negative, and they can change that. Yeah,
Cool.
in the medbed.
And you were expecting to be returned from your tour, but have since realized that you're actually not so much on a 20 as much as a 23 and back, because they actually asked you to prolong your contract, which is a very rare thing.
Yeah, well, I believe he told me this. The XO told me this in the office. He said a 2-year extension is what he said. But I remember when they took me away, I kept on saying like, I have another year. I have another year. So I think it was probably 10 months maybe. I still had left, and he said, no, we have to go now. But yeah, they gave me a 2-year extension, which he said they don't do that. They don't do that usually.
So that's how come part of you is still out there, and you're expecting to return sometime next year, right?
Sometime next year. I'm hoping June. I'm thinking June, but yeah, hopefully sometime next year.
Yeah. And now, speaking of your return, could you segue to your, let's say, feeling down in the dumps and roaming around a shady neighborhood of Florida?
Yeah, well, I was kind of suicidal, I guess, but I didn't want to commit suicide. And yeah, I was walking around in a bad neighborhood, drunk at night, and there was this woman, and she was standing on her porch, and she waved me in. So I came into the house, and it was just very weird. It was just two women in a house staring at me. It was strange. I didn't know what to think, and I was really drunk. And I just kind of said like, "Hey, do you care if I like lay down for a second?" Like they weren't really interested in me. They just wanted to stare at me. And they were like, "Yeah, yeah." And I laid down, and I heard like a weird voice kind of say, "I'm scared." Like it sounded like that. And
Like it swallowed helium.
yeah, yeah, it was like a weird high pitched kind of voice. And the woman said, "Oh, it's all right, it's all right." And then I felt something cold on my face. And then I felt like whenever you rub your eye too much, and you kind of like strain your eye a little bit when you rub it too much. And I felt it like I put my hand on my face, and I felt something cold and wet, and I grabbed it, and I tried pulling it out, but I felt like I was gonna pull my eye out. And then all of a sudden I heard a voice in my head, like a male voice, and he said, "Pull it out." And I said, "I'm gonna pull my eye out." He said, "Well, then pull your eye out. You have to get it out. Pull it out." So I just wrapped my finger around it, and I closed my eyes together as hard as I could, and I just pulled it. And the women actually jumped on top of me, and they were kind of holding me down. And then I reinforced it with my other arm, and I just pulled it out, and it was slapping in my hand. It was like going everywhere. And I, pushed them off me, and I stood up and I threw it across the hall. And I just yelled like, ah, like, I was just in fight or flight mode. And it was like their kitchen light was on, but no other lights were on. So all I could see was kind of like their shadows, you know what I mean? Where there's no lights in the room, but there's just one light in the background.
Because the Vril lizards don't like light.
Yeah, I'm guessing. Yeah, yeah. I mean, reptiles in general can see very well. Like I said, when you go in the underground bases, there's certain hallways that only have the red line. The red, white, blue, white, blue, and red stripe indicating the security level. And the ones that just are nothing but red on the floor, there's no lights that come on when you go down those hallways. They're very dim. Mm-hmm. And I saw both the women just jump back in the couch. And I don't know why, like a suppressed memories are weird because they float up to the top sometimes in a sense. Like they're always there, but it's almost like your conscious can't accept this yet. So I really didn't remember like the 20 year and back. I kind of blocked that in the back of my mind and my subconscious, but I yelled out lizard because I remember that's what the Pleiadians would call them, as like a slang, like an insult slang, lizard. And one woman after another, almost like they had a shared consciousness, said, he knows, like one after another. And I just ran out yelling. And a woman in the neighborhood asked me what was wrong. And I said, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, but
yeah, the creature.
Yeah, yeah. But before that happened, there was like this puppet on the coffee table. And I didn't know like what it was. And I was looking at the women, and I was looking at this little puppet, and I was looking at the women, and I got a little bit closer. I wanted to see what it was. And it was like this, had eye stalks. Its skin was kind of rust color. It had two like, prongs for hands, like claws. And it was only about, I don't know, like it was very small. It was like
1.5.
Yeah. It was very small. but when it was sitting down, it was like sitting on the coffee table, so it was even shorter. It was like legs were hanging down,
But
and it
at
was
that point,
moving like it was dead.
it was just lying down because it had ejected its brain, so it was dead.
It had ejected, yeah, its consciousness and try to put it in my eye and take over might take over my body. And that's when I yelled. I looked at them both because I saw this reptile, and I said, "Blizzard!" And then I ran out, and this woman said, "What's wrong?" And I said something, and one of the women came out of the house and tried to cover it up, like, "What's wrong with you?" Like she tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal. And I remember, I woke up the next day and I thought, "Oh, what a weird dream or what a weird incident." And then all of a sudden, like, "Oh, my eye hurts." My eye
Physical
really
proof, yeah.
like it was and it was like, and I for a week I had like really bad retinal nerve strain in that eye, and the voice I heard was actually the navigator of the ship I was on, Pleiadian. And he had such a strong, because we lived in the same room together. They have you do that. They want you to have a very strong telepathic link. um, the more often you communicate is what they call telepathy with someone, the stronger of a telepathic link you get with them. And he had such a strong telepathic link with me that he could tell that at that moment in time, the me back down on Earth was in danger, and he was kind of guiding me through what to do. So that's kind of, because I remember seeing him on the ship, and he was saying he was kind of nodding his head, and I said, "What's wrong?" And he looked up at me and he said, "You're in trouble." And he was just kind of looking down and kind of moving his head. And I said, "What is it?" And he looked up at me and he said, "That was close." Like he told me that it was like a close call, like something happened. And I was told that higher density beings can manipulate lower density. And I believe that that was like Aquino kind of do his last kind of strike against me. He was trying to do something to get me to take me out. And I believe that he kind of manipulated that to happen in my life somehow. Just the whole downward spiral I had in my life, he was kind of manipulating that to happen.
Did you come to that conclusion based off the Robert's commentary about this incident?
Yes. And he told me that he didn't go into great detail. I don't think he wanted me to know, but he said that, you have a close call, and it was Aquino. And, but he's not, he has no power over you anymore. He can't do anything to you anymore.
That was the last one.
Yeah, that was the last kind of strike he did against me.
But it proves that even if he can't, let's say, hex you or condemn you or something, then it's still a tug of war. It's not guaranteed that it's going to work because you still have, counteracting forces.
Yeah, but I mean, he was also looking down my timeline. I don't know. He was pretty confident. Which means he was in my presence, so he was able to see my future. And he told me he was genetically augmented in the womb and everything to be able to do things like this. He was from the year 2580, the future and everything. And yeah, I mean, he was pretty confident that I'd be fairly safe after. In other words, he pretty much lost control of me.
Mm-hmm.
He still had a minor hold of me in the future, but I don't think he really has any kind of control over me anymore, in the sense that manipulating my timeline.
Mm-hmm. But given that you are already kind of inebriated, do you think that without the Pleiadians' interference, you would have just allowed yourself to be body snatched? Because, in other words, did the process of, the worm tangling itself around your optic nerve, did that hurt itself, or was it kind of made to be maybe pleasant? So, I mean, or not hurtful?
I mean, I had already had it. I had already had it in my hand. It was just the whole thought of pulling my eye out, because
Right.
I felt my eye kind of coming out as I was pulling it. And I don't know, maybe in a sense of struggle. I mean, if I felt once the women jumped on top of me, that's when I went into major panic mode. I went into major fight or flight. Then I thought well, these people are trying to attack me. They're trying to do something to me. So, I mean, just out of, means of survival, I probably just would have, pulled it out anyways. I had a good hold of it. So it wasn't like I wasn't going to let it go any further. I was in a panic and everything, but I'm sure he helped. Just knowing that the whole him up there and me in the program at the time, knowing that me down here was in danger, was pretty
Poetic.
fascinating in itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I would make a conjecture that given how close it was, you were within, inches, hours less, then you could say that he basically did, save your life. That's how I see it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. But yeah, like I said, once they jumped on top of me, this is like for real. This is getting serious. And once the two women were trying to hold me down, I realized that I'm in trouble. I needed to do something to get out of this. So yeah. But I mean, he saved my life. Yeah, I would agree.
Hmm.
He,
And when did you piece it together that the women were themselves drones?
Well, whenever they said like one after another, it was almost like I said they had like a shared consciousness. They said, he knows, like one after another. When I said lizard, like they when I realized that that thing on the table was a small reptile, and that yeah, like once they said it was really eerie, one after another. They said
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But did you already connect it in your mind to what Robert had told you about the
No, no,
drones?
no. I mean, I was panicked. I was scared. I was more worried about getting out of that house like as quickly as possible than anything else, and kind of alerting the others of there's something in there. And I was telling them, it had eye stalks like a crab on top of its head. I don't know, and it had claws like a crab. It looked kind of like a crab thing with scales, and it was rust color. I was describing it to this older woman, and then the whole neighborhood came out to see what was happening because I was like yelling as I ran out of the house.
And did watching Donald Marshall's testimony give you some, I don't know, peace of mind? Because he is the biggest, whistleblower on the subject by far.
I mean, yes, because what it was is how I found out about Donald Marshall because I didn't really watch anything on ETs or UFOs. I didn't have my memory yet, and I just was watching something on the History Channel about the Vril talking about the German women who were channeling. It was like kind of like a conspiracy show I was watching on TV about they were channeling how to get ET technology, UFOs and things, and it was showing these German women that never cut their hair, and they called themselves the Vril Society. So I just typed it in the computer one time, Vril, and then when I was looking around, I saw the Donald Marshall sketch of like the small Vril lizard, and I said that was it. Like that's the thing that I saw. And so yeah, I mean it's confirmation definitely. And I just kind of stumbled on it on accident. I really didn't. I wasn't actually looking for whatever that was. It was just a program I watched about the German woman who used to channel ETs.
Yeah, because it might be the niche subject in this whole field. I don't know if you're aware, but you're actually the only person that had an attempted body snatching, event ever so far. But have you since met or suspected any other drones?
Well, Robert told me about him, and he said that like, well, I was with Aquino and everything like that, and I said something like, "You guys are like the Dahmer family, like Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer," and he said, "Jeffrey Dahmer, I could show you what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer." And he talked to the bigger reptile, and the bigger reptile went into like another hallway, and he came out with one. Now this is when I was in the cavern, so this was like a second time I saw one, and he set it down, and Aquino said, "Do it," and I guess it pushed out, its consciousness, and Aquino picked it up, and he kind of put it around my face, and I was tied to like like a torture rack kind of thing, so there's nothing I could do, and he just threw it away, and he said, "No, I won't do that to you." And well, and Robert explained to me that most serial killers, cruel people, pedophilia, a lot of that too. A lot of these people have been droned. They've been droned by these things, and that's like what causes it. And Jeffrey Dahmer was in the army, and I guess that's kind of like how they got a hold of him. They become really bad drug addicts, very bad alcoholics, and they, usually cruel to animals. Um, you know, serial killers, things like that. So they become just complete horrible people. And Robert explained to me that most serial killers have been drones, like most of the ones that you've seen that they've been. That's not natural, he said, for people to be that way. That's not like a natural way to be.
Yeah, but I listened to some interviews, and he's very well spoken. He's very coherent. Sounds like he has a 150 IQ. So they must be doing something right, the Vrils, because they must have a boost in intelligence when they body snatch humans.
Well, I mean, I've heard, I don't know too much, but I mean, just from Donald Marshall, because I have watched some of his stuff, they do lose some of their intelligence, but they keep a majority of it. Maybe he was a very intelligent man to begin with, maybe a very well-spoken man to begin with. They retained the person's memories, things like that. So, I mean, that makes sense, but
Mm.
I believe they degrade quickly too once that happens to them. I think like 7 or 8 years or something I've heard. I'm only going off other people's testimony, so this isn't firsthand knowledge or anything. But yeah, Robert told me that when you see people who are cruel like that, very cruel to animals, and,
It's a 9 in 10 chance, I think he said, that they're real.
yeah. He said a majority of those people have been droned. He said that's not really human nature to be that way, to be that cruel, to be to do things like that.
But the real lizard you saw during torture, would that not have been the first time you have seen it from your consciousness's point of view, right? Because your walking around town in Florida would have been post-career return.
Correct. So yeah,
Mm.
that was the first time I saw it. Yeah, and he said Jeffrey Dahmer. He said I can show you what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer. He
Mhm.
showed me the real lizard for the first time.
And when you say that he put ejected brain/worm on your cheek, was it just to instill fear? Because he basically just sacrificed a real lizard for that.
Yeah, I don't think they're very valuable to him. I mean, I think they're just kind of like low level reptiles and those caverns and everything like that. And I think there's a lot of them. But yeah, he was just trying to scare me. He was just doing stuff to try to freak me out. That's all. That's the whole point of it, was build up loosh or whatever. What do you want to call
Right,
it?
right. And on your way out of the house of the two women, which, by the way, do you know the address of?
I mean, I know roundabouts where it's at. Yeah, and yeah, they did have a white mailbox with polka dot stickers on it, and I remember that. I remember seeing that, and I remember when I saw the Vril lizard. When I was looking up the Vril Society, and I saw Donald Marshall's account for the first time. I remember, because that's a peculiar thing. You don't see that every day. And yeah, it was like they had like a mailbox with different size like colored polka dots all over the mailbox, and it's a way to kind of like let each other know that you're in good company, like you're one of us. We're drone too. You're welcome inside if you need help. So yeah, they did have that white mailbox with the polka dots, but I know roundabouts where it's at, but I don't know. I don't remember exactly.
But for outsiders, would you estimate, would you give us a rough estimate of how many people are droned, even just based on the polka dotted mailboxes?
I mean, I would say a percent, in my own opinion, less than a percent. It's not a lot. It's not a lot of people. I mean, they got to get you somehow, in the sense that I don't know how this thing. I mean, with
It must have
Florida,
been a trap. It must have been a trap, that house.
yeah, that house is a trap, but they primarily live underground, so they must have had this thing in a separate room or a closet, or I don't know. But Florida does have a lot of springs, so I mean, I wouldn't doubt. People think Florida doesn't have caves, but I wouldn't doubt if there was some dried out springs, within the coral and everything that Florida sits upon. So I wouldn't doubt if there was caverns around there as well. And plus, the whole area is just, I don't know, that area is known for stuff. And that part of Florida, St. Petersburg was like a death metal capital in like the 80s and 90s, like several of America, anyways, not of the world, but of America. And a lot of bands came out of there. And when I told Aquino I was from St. Pete, Florida, he kind of, he said like, "Oh, I've been there." When I first met him in the office, when he was first interviewing me, and in the back of my head, I kind of thought, "I bet." Because in this neighborhood, it's the South Side. There's a lot of them live there and stuff. A lot of where these bands are used to, anyways. So it was like an area I was familiar with in that sense.
Yeah, and in fact, I heard from one of the handful of real whistleblowers that you don't want to walk alone on a beach at night in Florida because you might just get ambushed by a group of reals. It might just be a rumor, but and also I wanted to ask, when you were in space and this was happening simultaneously, did you feel it on your space self that you were close to death on Earth?
No, no, I didn't. I had no idea. I really didn't know what was wrong with the navigator, because he was kind of looking down. He was like kind of looking at the floor, and he was like moving his head, and I didn't know what he was doing. And I was even asking him, like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, shh, be quiet. Like, he's like, you're in
But so
trouble.
you do remember it, which is something. That's good.
Yeah, I remember that interaction he had with me while I was down on Earth, but still up there
Hmm.
at the same time. And as I said, like, it was happening to me at that time, even though we're up there. They don't really call it space. It's a different concept than that, but they just kind of say up there, like when you first joined the program. But yeah, he had a strong enough link with me to where he knew I was in danger.
And sorry to obsess about this, but it's the last one about the Vril, because you gave me in private some more detail about how the worm looked like and felt like.
I mean, I think it had a horn at the end, like a small horn, but it was basically just, I don't know, maybe that much of diameter, and just long. It was dark, but it was wet, and it wiggled. Like I said, it was slapping in my hand. It was moving around, and I just threw it, and I felt I could hear it slapping against my hand as I had it in my hand. I threw it away, but I mean, it didn't have a head or any. It was just very quick. It was very. I wanted to get it away from me as quickly as possible, so I didn't get a good look at it. I just threw it down the hallway and wanted to get rid of it.
And it was fairly long, kind of like a worm or a little snake.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was.
that's
It was
pretty long.
well. Yeah, it was probably. Yeah, it was probably like that. Yeah,
Hmm.
because I had it in my hand. And I could feel it. I had it like right here, and I could feel it kind of smacking the back of my hand as it was moving around.
Right, right. But the droning doesn't just happen with cannibals and serial killers and sadists. It also happens for politicians and people they want to keep reins on.
Yeah, droning happens, and that happens. They want to as far as what Donald Marshall says, I'll just revert what I've heard, and it makes sense that Aquino just saw this thing as very disposable. Like he just threw it away like it was nothing, and I guess they want to get out of whatever situation they're in by any means possible. So once these Vril lizards' consciousness gets into a person, they'll do whatever they want. Whatever the reptiles or the Satanists or whatever whoever's in charge, they'll do whatever they want to stay here. They feel like this existence is much better. But I mean, there's also whatever happened to Aquino as well, and that's in the sense of when somebody told me in the barracks that there's a machine that can extract the consciousness out of a person, but they have to do it before puberty. But they can't do it when they're too young, when they're like 3 or 4, because the body's mostly sedentary. And the bones will get brittle, the body will get sick, and it'll die. But yeah, they have a machine where they can extract consciousness, and then another being, like a reptile, can project its consciousness, because they're like fourth density, which is like astral plane, spirit world kind of thing. So they could do things like this, and they can inhabit the body and kind of control it like a machine. And that's why sometimes when people see, in my opinion, see their eyes change, or maybe like a fog go over their face, maybe it's that person can see like almost like their consciousness, their spirit kind of come through their eyes. That's what I feel a lot of it is too. Is whatever happened to him, whatever this machine is, that can extract the consciousness.
Oh, so it is machine based. Okay. But it's
Oh,
another,
there's a machine base, and then there's the Vril base too. But
yeah,
machine base is like something that the reptiles use, and the higher level reptiles, and
right.
the Vril is something the lower level ones use.
And but you do have to have a certain genetic relation to the reptilians.
Yes, yes, because there's something about your soul and your DNA are kind of intertwined. Your DNA signature, your code, and your DNA, it has to be the same as like the soul. They're not one and the same, but they have to be compatible. Otherwise, the body will reject the consciousness on that level. So yeah, you have to be like a certain bloodline to be able to like be a part of this. And I'm sure it's probably the satanic families, and they just sacrifice their children to these things. Or maybe it's these things that have children. Their bodies are already inhabited by a reptile, an outside source, and they
Hmm.
have children, and they just do it to them once they get to a certain age, 9 or 10. I believe is probably around about where it's at.
Yeah. So I'm just going to make a parenthesis here. Speaking about Satanic Rule, which you said that that's what we've been under for hundreds of years, according to the XO. But I wanted to mention that there's this Greek Restoration Group, apparently a paramilitary, like the equivalent of Department Zero for Greece. And they say that since 9600 BC, that Earth has been under the control of evil manipulating pirate-like aliens from the constellation Draco, Bootes, Orion, with the moon as their base of operations, and that they, which some are reptilian and some are defector humanoid aliens, are the scourge of the universe. They hijack solar systems, they rob them of all their precious metals, gold, silver, titanium, and crystals, and including the souls of human beings, of living beings. And the moon is a spacecraft that's equipped with technology capable of creating paranormal phenomena on Earth, and that all religions throughout history are the creations of these lunar aliens, and also that the moon has super devices that capture souls after death, that force them into reincarnation after erasing the memory of the soul. Would you say that what you've learned, is in line with this?
I would say it's in line with this, but I think what he was saying was there's always kind of like opposing. Our world is less about, like the Pleiadian world, it's male and female, and they intertwine and they kind of work together. But our duality is more like two opposing forces that are pushing against each other to try to get dominance over each other, like whoever is, more in control. And I think what he was talking, that makes sense. And I'm sure they've been around a lot longer than hundreds of years. But he was just saying in the sense that we have been under complete control of this negative force for hundreds of years. Now, I'm sure they've been around for thousands of years, if not long, you know what I mean, for a very long time. But he said that, like, as far as like they've had complete dominance over us for hundreds of years, is how he kind of put it. So I don't think that they just showed up hundreds of years ago, but I think that our world has just been under complete dominance by them. And because he explained to me that like the point of World War I and World War II wasn't only to lower the population of Europe, but it was also to get rid of any trace of the what are they called? That civilization,
Atlantis?
the Tartars, the
Oh,
Tartarians. Yeah, he said the Tartarians were real, and he said that they blew up, like, because if you look at World War One, even like a man in a biplane in France, every building is leveled. Like every building is leveled, and he's just flying over Paris, France. And he said that that was like a big part of what World War One and World War II were all about, was just to destroy any evidence of the Tartarians. And he said that that was a big part of what World War One and World War II were for.
yeah, I think it's the reset that people talk about a lot, the out of place architecture. But the duality that you mentioned on Earth happens to be that between the Anglo-Saxons and the Satanists. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. He told me, and I didn't think this was, when he told me this, it was very something I did not expect. He said basically that like Caucasians came from Tiamat, which is the asteroid belt. We were in a war, I believe, with the reptiles. They blew the world up. Fragments hit Mars, kind of destroyed Mars. They also used a weapon. We did have refugees living on Mars. There was some water left. It was still kind of sustainable, but then they used a technology to destroy the water. So then we came to Earth, and he said that the Slavic people were more closely related to those original people from Tiamat. And he said, but they don't have a direct connection to the Earth. He said the Slavic people are the most spiritually advanced people on Earth. But he said they don't have a direct connection because our ancestors, meaning like the Northern Europeans, interbred with the Neanderthal. And he said that's what the bump on the back of your skull is. It's a Neanderthal trait. He said Slavic people don't have that, and if they do, then they have Anglo-Saxon like lineage. They have an ancestor that was Anglo-Saxon. And he said because we interbred with the Neanderthal, that gave us a direct connection to the Earth because they had a direct connection to the Earth. Yeah, and I asked about weren't the Neanderthals, primitive? And he said no, they had, advanced civilization and they had art and music. And I said, well, why in all the archaeological digs were they hunter gatherers? And he said, well, when the Ice Age happened, civilization fell and everybody became hunter-gatherers. And that was actually something the reptiles manipulated in our world to happen to try to wipe us out more with the Ice Age. He explained that to me.
Mm-hmm. Which is also around the time post-Atlantis that this source mentioned, 9600 BC, which is also falls in line with Ashayana-Din and other sources that they've had control. But the first mission of the Anglo-Saxons, I heard, is also a kind of bewildering fact that you heard.
Well, yeah, he told me the mission of the Anglo-Saxon is to lower the population of Asia, especially China. He said that the Chinese people were genetically engineered to be slaves. And I believe that maybe that's what it had to do with who was it? Wasn't the Anunnaki? Was it the Anunnaki who they say they created a slave race to dig
No,
holes?
actually, I can shed light on this because of the other quotes from this same group, the Greek group. It says that the group is openly declaring from the beginning that there is a global, very ancient Jew-Masonic Mongolic conspiracy acting as agents for the Chinese people, who in turn act knowingly and unknowingly as agents of the draconian allied forces. They also claim that there will be a World War III with the West against the Chinese and their allies, that their superior Chinese forces will genocide all white and African populations, which I believe you saw, you had Robert describe in the timeline that he was from. So basically that was, yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, he's. If I forget, tell me. Yeah, he said the first mission was lower population of Asia. Because they're a slave race. They're genetically engineered to be slave. He said our ancestors actually built the Great Wall of China to keep the Chinese out. He said he called them the Indo-Europeans. Actually built that wall to keep the Chinese out. And he said the second mission of the Anglo-Saxon is to ensure the survival of the Anglo-Saxon. That's it. Yeah.
Which they did. They did ensure it.
They did, yes. And he said that in his original timeline, when Hillary Clinton became the president, and it's something that the Satanists believe, they believe that the United States has to fall first. And he said that they changed the outcome of the Civil War. And that's what screwed up our timeline. He said that the Confederacy was originally supposed to win the Civil War. Satanists went back in time. They killed carriers, men on horseback carrying messages to generals and things. And he said, and they gave that information to the Union soldiers. And he said, the South was 87% agrarian back in those days during the Civil War. He said, why would a bunch of and most of those people were farmhands. He said, why would a bunch of farmhands fight and die to keep their greatest economic competitor, slaves, legal? And I said, I don't know. He said, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And I said, no. And he explained to me, how the Satanists went back in time and they changed everything. But there's something they believe that the United States must fall first. And I don't know what it's like in their prophecy or something that they have to follow. And so when Hillary Clinton became the president, her first term, we were completely just overrun, invaded by immigration, which was just in a mass
under the guise.
Under the guise, yeah. And it was just an invasion. It was just a complete invasion. And then her second term, we got into a war with China that was intended to be lost, and we were carpet bombed with nuclear weapons. And then he said it was a 100-year breeding program with like United States, like European nations, where they were sending people in from other countries, and then they took the lighter skinned people, and then they had a 100-year breeding program with the Asian people, and then for 100 years they just kind of marveled at themselves that they were finally one people now, and everything differences were gone, and then they realized they made a mistake. So then they tried to for another 100 years they did the Mike Pence program, where they and basically everybody looked like Mike Pence, and Mike Pence.
They tried to perfect the Anglo-Saxon gene to hybrid.
Yeah, they tried to extract the Anglo-Saxon gene, he told me, and they had that constant scowl. He had that same scowl that Mike Pence always has, the turned up kind of needle nose. He said that their hair is black, their eyes are usually brown, sometimes blue or green, and their hair begins with salt and pepper at 50, turn pure white by 60, and their average life expectancy is 110.
Mm-hmm. So exactly like this Greek paramilitary group said that they would try, but at the same time, this was the whole thrust of the group itself, is to avert that timeline, which they say they hope to do. And just because they claim that the Chinese are genetically manufactured by the draconian aliens, and that they're descendants of these reptilian races doesn't mean that they are racist and they actually want the Chinese/Mongolian populations to be not to be eliminated, but to be functional and peaceful again. And they say that this way you can prevent World War III, and that just a little bit of extra corroboration. They claim that the only native humans on planet Earth are the African race, although their souls came from Sirius, but they're just reincarnated here, and that all races and nations owe them respect, and that should have African races as their priority, because the latecomers like us, which are the Caucasian white population, are descended directly from the humanoid aliens serving the galactic government, and were brought here in very ancient times to help these natives, the African populations, to evolve into a civilization that's capable of coping with the concepts and the way of life of the galactic government that our progenitors come from.
Yeah, I would 100%. He told me the same thing. He said the only native population is the sub-Saharan African. He told me the same thing. I'd like you to email me that information or send it to me. That's interesting.
Yeah, sure, please. Okay, so you also said that in regards to the Satanic Rule, that it is on its last legs, and the sign of that is the fact that portals to other worlds are failing to work. Is that the case?
Well, he explained to me that portals on other worlds are as far as them being able to get away, as far as looking glass technology, which all underground bases have looking glass technology, those are being shut down. But also in my opinion, he explained to me that he said there's beings walking around us all the time, like higher density beings. We don't even know it, because when I first walked into his office, he was able to just kind of appear at the end of his desk, and then he just appeared right in front of me. And I when we started talking, I said, "How did you do that?" And he said there's naturally occurring portals that open up all over Earth, and third density beings can't see them, but he was fifth density. And he said that he was just, when you walked in, two portals just opened up, and I just walked through them. That's all that happened. And there was that incident in the mall in Miami where many witnesses said they saw something that looked like portals opening up, and they saw like shadow beings walking through them. And like it like really scared a lot of people. And to me, that almost feels like that maybe that part of the world kind of slipped into fourth density for a second, and like everybody could kind of see what's always happening around you, and you don't even notice that it's happening. And he said that, going into higher densities, he said, I'm wearing a belt. Like, that's the only reason you can see me right now.
So he was nerfing himself. He was dumbing down.
Yeah, exactly. So he could like move and people could interact with him and see him. And I said, well, show me the belt. And he was like, no, at first. I said, show it to me. He pulled up his shirt, and over top of his undershirt, he had almost like what looked like black, like electrical tape. It was shiny. And it was probably like 2 inches thick. And he said that if I wasn't wearing this belt, if I walked past you, all you would see was just like a blur of light, like a flash, like a split second of light. That's all you would see. And he said, because we're just not interactive. And I even asked him, I said, do you wear that like around the house? Because he said his wife didn't know. And he said, no, I have a bracelet that I wear. And he said, I don't want to wear it in my uniform. He said, but in my uniform, I wear this belt. And I said, what do you tell her about the bracelet? And he said, I just tell her it's Chinese magnets. That's what he said, like one of those Chinese magnet bracelets.
Yeah. But do you think that when, let's say, the Earth is going to inevitably ascend, that we will, let's say, make the transition, the next step up, whether that's fourth or fifth, it's unknown, but the third, do you think that it's still going to be here, but it's going to be like the same way that we regard the second dimension now, which is the animal kingdom? So it's not like it's going to disappear, but we're just going to be in the next one up.
Yeah, we're just he said fifth. He said we're going to go up to fifth. I think there's something about fourth that it's like, it's more of a spirit world. It's more of an astral plane, things like that. And fifth is more spiritually and technologically advanced, is how he explained it to me. But I mean, third's going to be here still. And I'm not sure about, are so many people going to make it and so many people not? I have no idea.
He didn't know. He didn't say that because maybe he was wanting to protect you from maybe some cataclysmic event or something that would alter the timeline if you did blow the whistle on it.
I mean, I don't know. It was almost like he wanted to keep it a surprise for me. He was just like, I said, are we going to make it to fifth density in my lifetime? And he said, he just smiled and he said, you'll have to find out for yourself. And yeah, he basically said that third density is hell. He said there is no hell. He said if there is a hell, it's third density.
Mm.
And he said that we're the last ones, basically. Like, we're the last world. We've been kept artificially in this third density. And that's why other beings are starting to help us, in a sense, because it's an outside means that's keeping us in third density, keeping us, down and oppressed in that sense. So it's, an outside sources are coming out, not really to come onto Earth and help us, like, in that sense. They are cleaning out some of the caverns, but it's still something they want us to do on our own, to experience it on our own. They can't help us really in that sense. They can't drag us over the finish line. It's something we have to experience ourselves and we have to do by ourselves. But we are, in the sense of Solar Warden and all these other ETs, making sure nobody's allowed in, nobody's allowed out. It was kind of like the Earth is on lockdown right now, is how he explained it. And yeah, like all the other there's no portals in, no portals out, no one's allowed in, no one's allowed out until this
Quarantine. Yeah.
Yeah, quarantine.
But the field that has been used to, trap the consciousnesses here is now in our hands. We're using it now. We're in control of it.
Well, I remember he said, like, it wasn't when I was talking to him in the office, but eventually he said, the moon is ours. It's going to be ours eventually. And I remember being in the program, and I wasn't a part of the moon being free, but I remember I was on the moon. I was in the moon after it was free, and I remember that. So yeah, I would say definitely the moon is probably freed by now.
He might have been referring, though, to the timeline that he has secured, so it might not have actuated yet.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he was looking down my timeline, and that seemed to give him almost more of a concrete evidence instead of Looking Glass. Like, it almost seemed like he thought that my timeline was more accurate, because the Looking Glass is 94% accurate, is how he put it to me, and 4% different outcome, or no, yeah, 4% different outcome and a 2% variable. So 94, 4, 2 is how he explained it to me. But yeah, he almost seemed to think like looking down, seeing my future almost seemed more accurate to him.
Right, that makes sense. And that's how he found out, for example, that part of that either 2% that's variable or 4% that's different was when Trump lost, of course, fraudulently on his second go around for president.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was just that, 4% chance of him not winning. They happened to pull it off.
Right. But when he does look into, let's say, your timeline, would you say that that cemented, that raises it to 100% real?
It seemed more accurate to him anyways,
Mm-hmm.
because he even like told me, he's like, yeah, he's like, they must have got it, they must have, there was that 4% and they got away with it. Yeah. So he seemed to think that my timeline, in some sense, I guess, even though I wasn't aware of it and I didn't really know what he was doing at the time, it didn't make any sense to me. He seemed to, by like looking into my future, that seemed more accurate than the actual Looking Glass in the sense of 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like kind of like living that life, and it was almost like he was living my life. It's kind of like how he explained it to me. Yeah.
And they even mounted looking glasses onto planes. Could you explain why they would need to do that in order to scan the world? Is it that the proximity to those places, even though it's in different time, would give them a more accurate read on the future?
Yeah, it was more accurate. I think he said like it was more like 98%, but they would put like Looking Glass like face down with on bombers, and he said they would open up the bomb bay doors and they would just fly over different parts of the earth to see if new cities were going to be built, different population changes, everything like that. He said that we're going to go into like kind of like a new age, and we're going to go into a more advanced civilization. So different cities are going to be built in different parts of the world. And I mean, Trump even talked about that he wants to start building new, more advanced cities. He wants to do that in the United States. And I believe that's going to start happening all over the world within the next several years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and using new methodologies and cleaner energy and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you were in fifth density and could look down people's timelines at will, did you take advantage of it, or was it considered maybe rude? Because I guess at that level of advancement, people can tell when you're looking down their timeline.
Well, it's like ETs, they pretty much know when they're going to die. I mean, they do have a chance of being incorrect, but it's just something they accept. It's a higher density thing that they don't really see death as the end. It's just, something else, a new step. They don't really see it as anything to be mournful or griefful of. I mean, I remember them grieving maybe for 3 to 4 days over losing a loved one, but then after that, it was just kind of like they would just come back, and it wasn't a big deal to them. And as far as like, I mean, I remember definitely I did it one time. I mean, I could do it, and I would look down timelines. And I was kind of weary of looking down my own timeline because I have that human in me. I don't want
Yeah.
to really know. I don't want to know the future, and I was kind of fearful of it. And others would look down my timeline and kind of like tell me it's going to be okay, it's all right, but they didn't really tell me. I told them I didn't want exact details. But I remember coming back on the ship, and the CO, which he didn't like me, and I called him Stick because I thought he was the stick in the mud. But he was the commanding officer, and he was jealous of me, and because they didn't accept him the way they accepted me, the Pleiadians.
Yeah.
And I was their king for a while, and it had different purposes. And he on the ship, he said, "Have a seat, Your Majesty," and it really made me angry because I was losing everything. I was losing my family. I was losing everything. And I stood up, and that same guard that saved my life from the goon that strangled me, he was their own personal guard, and he was the one following me around there. Like time travel is confusing, but he was the guy who was actually watching me as well on the base when I was in St. Mawgan, make sure I wasn't in trouble or getting hurt. And that guard stepped up in front of me, and the CO said, "You can step aside. I'm not afraid of him." And I walked up to him, and I started looking down his timeline. And I said, "Congratulations, you lived to a long age." And I said, "You're in your deathbed now. Your last thoughts, they're not of your wife or your children. They're not even of your own mother. Your last thoughts are of me. You die with the knowledge knowing that I'm a better man than you. Remember that on your deathbed. I am a better man than you." And then Robert said to me telepathically, "You shouldn't have said that." And so I yelled at him out loud. I said, "Well, you should have kept him in line." And yeah, I mean, I guess that was kind of unethical, but I never liked the guy. And this was my last, like, the hell with you after he said
Mm.
that.
Right. But so you didn't really go trigger happy with that ability to just use it to like make decisions based on that in day-to-day life or anything?
I mean, no, I don't remember doing that decisions in day-to-day life. I remember one time we were in like a skirmish, and you can kind of tell they'll get quiet when they know they're going to die soon. It's bizarre. Like a week before, like ETs will get kind of quiet when they know it's coming, and they don't really talk as much, and they kind of keep to themselves. And I was the pilot, and it was the navigator, and we were in like a skirmish with like the Draconians, and it was in space, and it was different ships. And I changed the outcome, and that's kind of like how they referred to me as like a variable they weren't expecting. That's how Robert explained it. He said, "You were a variable they weren't expecting." And after the skirmish was over and we lived, we got the right frequency of their ship. We jammed into their frequency. We knocked their shields down. We took the ship out. He turned to me and he looked, and he kind of, he basically said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I was supposed to die today." He said, "And you changed that." And I said, "I don't know." Like, and he was just really amazed that I was able to kind of change the outcome that he thought was going to be his own death in
Oh,
that sense. Yeah.
interesting. And you also you don't have to go into the story because it's pretty long, but at one point on Earth, you did actually get to zoom in on a timeline that was not the one that turned out, but it was just one that was possible in the case of you avoiding your first potential marriage.
Yeah, like I was I I knew this girl named Jen. She was my sister's friend. She was a telepath. She knew my dad and I were both telepaths. She liked me. I became like the mascot for like my sister's friend. And it was Halloween, and it was like a slumber party. And I was 11 and she was probably, I don't know, 15 or something like that at the time. And she grabbed me by the hand. It's like all the girls walked in and she grabbed me by the hand and just pulled me into her mom's bedroom. And her mom was getting ready. She looked like Elvira, kind of like Vampira, like a mix between like a vampire and Elvira. She was getting ready for a Halloween party to go out. And she was in front of the mirror. And she said, "Mom, this is him," like telepathically. And she said, her mom said, "You say the father can do it?" She said, "Yes." And she said, "What about the mother?" She said, "Not as much." And she said, "And the sister?" She said, "No." And then she kind of like lifted my head up and like everything, like the room kind of engulfed in orange and red and like flecks of blue. And all I could see was like her eyes. And I kind of like got an image of like Nordics behind her as this was happening. And she kind of shook my head. And I remember the girls were outside in the TV room and they were screaming. Some of them were. My sister didn't see it, but other girls saw it. And the woman said, "You're a powerful little boy. You know that, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Good, now go play." And we just went back out and the other girls were talking about it. So it was the next day, and it did something to me. It felt like I was like hallucinating for years. I don't think I ever really got used to it. And Robert later on explained to me that that's why I was in partial fifth density. That's why the chair didn't put me back down in the third, is because whatever this woman did, you know, it put me partially in the fifth. It wasn't the chair itself. And he said it was them. It was the Pleiadians that did that, you know, and that's why I kind of saw them in the background. It was like almost to get me ready for this. And yeah,
despite the woman being a Kabbalist.
But yeah, the woman was a Kabbalist, yeah, and her husband was like high-ranking like mafia.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were living in like Pinellas Park, Florida, and yeah, she said to Jen, she goes, "Jen, take the girls outside and go, and why don't you play for a while? I want to talk to Daryl." And Jen took them out, and you know, she was asking me, "Do I like Jen?" And I said, "Yeah," and she you know, said, "What else can you do?" She was kind of asking me, and I picked up a car. I said, "Can I look at your car on the shelf?" And she said, "Yeah." And I picked up like a '69 Vet, and I said, "Your husband used to own one of these." And she said, "He did." And I said, "You know, he wants another." And she said, he does. And she said it's something to the effect of like, "What do you feel about? How would you feel about marrying Jen?" Like she wanted whatever I had in her bloodline, is what it seemed like. And I liked Jen. I was like 11, but I wasn't really thinking that way. But, you know, I decided to look down the timeline. I could do that when I was younger. I was very good at that when I was younger. And for me, it was like a swirling at the top right of my vision. I could see a swirl, and then the swirl became a tunnel, and then I could go down that tunnel. I could speed up faster through the more mundane parts of my life, and I could stop and look around at the more important parts. And I could see that if I made this decision and followed what she wanted me to do, I would eventually marry Jen when I was 16. I would drop out of high school, and she would have been about, no, I was 15. I was 15, and I left Florida. I dropped out of high school, and Jen was probably around 19, maybe going on 20. But she's about 4 years older than me. But, you know, we got married. We had a daughter and 2 boys. We used to, the mother was working with me, and she even said that, the Kabbalist mother, she says, like, "I can help you. I can make you stronger. I can make you, you know, more powerful. I can help you." She was telling me that as a kid. And she did that in this timeline. She, you know, made me stronger, have more abilities. And I was almost like a kind of a assistant to the dad, where if he ever had meetings in warehouses and things like that, I would sit down next to him and I could say what the intentions were of the man, if he was armed. And the wife would be in a separate room, and I was telling it to her telepathically, everything I could detect about this person. And the husband would have a small earpiece in, and she'd have a microphone on, and she'd be telling him everything I was telling her. And then one time, I guess somebody got wise to it. Somebody figured it out, and they sent an assassin. And, you know, he immediately, I said he has a gun above his right ankle, and he went for it. And he grabbed the gun, and he shot me in the chest, and it was over quick. And I remember like seeing the funeral. I remember my father, I guess he was always destined to have a heart attack when he did. He had a heart attack. And then after that, my mom committed suicide with pills. And then after that, like my sister was all alone and she started drinking. And I just looked at Jen and I just snapped out of it. And I snapped out of that timeline. And I said, no, I can't marry Jen. There's no way. I said, it will destroy my family. And I told her what happened. And she said, we'll stop it. We'll stop it. And I kept on looking down and nothing stopped it. Like anything she said, it didn't stop. And I said, I can't do that. So yeah, that's what happened. That was that story.
Sounds like you made the right call.
Yeah, yeah, and I was able to do that younger. I was really good at things like that when I was younger.
Mm-hmm. So lastly, about the timelines and the probabilities and Looking Glass, there is one case that you were told that people are forbidden to step inside that certain era, which you found out after invoking a certain most famous person in the world.
Yeah, when I was being tortured by Aquino, I said, like, what in the name of Christ do you want? And he kind of like, stop saying that. Like he didn't like it. So I realized what was happening, and I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to undo my straps and let me go. And he started doing it. And he started talking out of the side of his mouth to the goon. And I said, in the name of Yeshua, I command you to stop talking to him. Stop. But the goon got wise to it by then and, cocked back and punched me and knocked me out for a couple seconds. But yeah, when I was talking to Robert, I asked him, I said, he knew all these different things. I really didn't have that memory. I didn't have the memory at the time, but he seemed to time travel a lot, knew all these different things. And I said, was, Jesus real? And he said, yes, and his name holds power. And he said that when people get a high enough clearance for Looking Glass technology, one of the first things they ask for is to see Christ. He said, even the Satanists, they just want to know he's real, I guess. They really want to know that, Jesus existed. And he said nobody's allowed to step through the Looking Glass, though. You can observe, but like nobody's allowed to step during that time period. Nobody can alter that time period. And he said even the Satanists know better than that. And I asked him what he looked like, and he said pretty much like the depictions of his pictures. Like he had long hair, a beard, and he pretty much looked the same. Yeah.
Right. I heard that the entity known as Jesus also acted a similar role at the inception of the Atlanteans, and that he was the first person to outlive their medium age. So he also performed miracles then. But it wasn't until the Pleiadians made themselves known in that civilization early on. Before that, they had kind of 1800s technology, but with the planted, also staged event of Pleiadians landing their ship and saying that they have problems or something, then that's what triggered the acceleration of the Atlantean technology and so on. But it said also in this book that the Atlanteans, the aliens that they most collaborated with by far, were the Pleiadians. And did you hear anything from the Pleiadians about their past, tangles with Earth?
I don't really remember anything like that, but I do remember Robert saying that we were, the descendants of the Atlanteans. As far as like, maybe that happened long ago, but they just kind of kept to themselves, and they really didn't know too much about our culture or anything like that. Like I said, they were like fascinated by our music, and they didn't really understand how I did it when they first saw it. Like it was just something completely foreign to them. But I remember, like I said, like leader, her name was Leah. Her father was like from Norway or Sweden, Scandinavia, I think. So, and that was like the only one I could remember besides my own children that were, half human. So it didn't seem like it was something they did a lot, but I mean, I wouldn't doubt it, but it's something I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's interesting about the fact that we are their descendants. It's true. But about the Pleiadians, do they also use VR or holographic technology? I'm guessing that's what comes out of their Glasspads as well. They don't just have the screen.
Yeah, and I mean, they can also kind of show like a flat image if they want to see like a view screen, things like that. It'll just appear in front of you, and it's just part of the technology of the ship. I mean, yeah, so they use holograms, they use things like that if they want to observe something, if they want to watch something that's important, an ascension of a new world or something. Like I remember I saw that on the ship with them, and yeah, it was. So they definitely had holographic technology. You'd see it on the
Hmm.
ship.
And the when you were hooked to the ship as a pilot and were touching the panels on each hand, did it involve any finger movement, or was it simply the fact that it facilitated your connection somehow, maybe through the nerves?
I mean, it was almost like I was a part of the ship. Like my mind was with the ship. It was almost, having the ship make a left turn would be like moving my left arm. It was just,
So there was movement. Okay.
yeah. No, I wouldn't move but it would be that same kind of, it would just be something in your mind. There was no
Oh,
movement. There was no movement, but it would just be like similar to that. Something you wouldn't
maybe
even think about. It would be second nature to you.
seems to me like you were moving your hand, but not physically, but just etherically, maybe.
Yeah, maybe etherically, but it was that same kind of, it was just mental motor skills. It felt like it was my mind was a part of the ship, is how it almost felt.
Yeah, that's the only explanation for you having to hold your hands on it. But did you have any devices that, let's say, tracked your eyes or that you interface with using your voice?
Well, I think some people did have that. That was necessary. I remember the commanding officer of that ship, not back on my base, but the skipper, of the ship. He wasn't a telepath. But if you have telepathic abilities, you don't need that. You don't need the eye movement or anything like that. You can just make a telepathic link with the ship. And they call that advanced ET tech. So in order to use advanced ET tech, you have to be able to create a telepathic link, whether it's with a smart Glasspad, a suit, a ship. You have to be able to actually link up with the tech itself telepathically.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody in the program could do it. I remember that.
Right, right. And their glass beds, and I'm guessing they had something like phones as well, the Pleiadians. Were they clear?
They were clear, yeah. And you also had tech in your ear, if you wanted to talk, things like that. They had different technology. It wasn't visible or anything like that. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
to be able to communicate and everything like that, you had a certain kind of technology. I'm guessing kind of hooked up to your eardrums, close to your eardrums, so you could hear. And
So
yeah,
they could call anyone on a whim.
yeah, they could call anyone. But I mean, and then like the older ones didn't even need that. It was this, they could call people to them because as they got older, they got very telepathic. So if they wanted someone that was on a different part of the ship, they could just focus in on that person and call them. And also like telepathy like that, if somebody was talking about you, you would pick up on it sometimes. If somebody was having a conversation, even if they're a different part of the ship, if you had a strong link with that person, you would kind of like pick up on what they were saying and maybe get a few words here and there. But yeah, that's kind of like how telepathy was in fifth density.
Hmm. And their implants, were they visible? And also, did they even have nanites? So maybe little microscopic enhancements in their, so let's say, blood or something.
Yeah, they had the nanites, and you couldn't see it though. Everything, it was in the ear canal, and even the ship, even their suits were similar to that, in the sense of nanites. They could like push a button on their belt buckle, and if they thought of something, if they wanted to wear a suit, they could wear a suit. So yeah, the skin tight blue suits that they wear, they could change that into kind of anything else, any other clothing they wanted it to be, just by a
Mm.
thought.
Hmm. And speaking of Atlantis, who the Pleiadians collaborated with and actually saved them from destruction, they also solved the problem of disease and poverty. And from what you were told, we'll do the same and also live for 800 years, which is the lifespan of the off-world Germans, which is, in line with our potential.
Yes, yes. He said that it's going to happen in a trickle, but then it'll become faster. And he said the first thing you're going to see are smartphones, and it's based off the smart Glasspad. And then it'll begin to come out quicker and quicker, different technologies. He was kind of iffy on whether or not ETs would be disclosed within my lifetime, but he said medbeds would come out, healing tanks, age regression, and yeah, he said our true potential is over 800 years as far as our lifespan, and that's how long the off-world Germans live. But because of all the poisons in the water and the food and the air, it causes us to age rapidly. Because they don't,
Hmm.
the reptiles don't want us to know our true potential. They're like afraid of us in a sense.
Right. And as for the red and orange light that you emitted in that party, did that happen any other time? For example, you seeing astral shapes, like the auras of people. I know you said that you saw at the first time you saw the Pleiadians in that space station of the German world, you saw them as briefly as flashes of white light.
Yeah, it was. I was on the small craft that they were on, and they were in the front. There was like a wall, and I was like in the back area. And then they came out and they sat down, and we're looking at each other. And she said he looks disturbed, and the man said, "Wouldn't you be if you had to live with them?" Talking about the reptiles. And I looked over at them, and they both just kind of like looked over at me and like cocked their heads. They kind of like at the same exact time, and it was weird. And when they cocked their heads, all I could see was like their eyes and like a bright white light, like coming, like emitting from them. And it made me like look away. Like I looked away really quick, and the man came up to me and he kneeled down in front of me and he said, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And I said back to him, "Yes," but he wanted like a physical confirmation. He said it again, "Can you hear what I'm saying to you?" And I nodded my head. And then he sat back down in front of her, and there's a way to concentrate. You focus in on the person more, and you can have a private conversation telepathically where others can't hear. And that's what they did after that.
Hmm. And you said that when you witnessed the sun hologram that was showing how the sun ascended, that it was something like a religious ceremony or ritual. Did you come across any others in your stay there?
Well, I mean, on their world, when my first daughter was being married to a warrior caste, a leader's son, that was like a religious. It was almost like a kind of a church almost. There were like pews, and it was like a woman that was in charge of the ceremony. And that is offhand like the only other kind of religious kind of ceremony I think I ever seen besides the
Hmm.
ascension of a star.
That must have happened quite a few times, considering you had something like 800 children.
Well, it was all. It was, well, I set that up with his parents, Lear, the man and the woman. Leah was her name. I don't remember what the man's name was, but I set that up with them when they were young. I wanted their son to marry my daughter. I said, "Do you have prearranged marriages?" We do sometimes, they said. And I said, "Well, I'd like them to get married." And they agreed. And yeah, like, but it's usually just warrior casts that get married. And the regular men usually don't get married. It's like different. And the warrior casts get more wives. But yeah, just for usually it's just couples just kind of come together and they just let it happen naturally. And it's usually the warrior cast men to get actually like a religious ceremony, like a marriage ceremony.
Yeah, because there's just too many marriages. But about the other tidbits that you found out about that are unknown about the structure of the planet and universe, you found out the real shape of the Earth, which is unlike some fringe theories, it's not flat.
Yeah, toroidal. I saw it when I saw it. It looked toroidal. It looked kind of like between like a donut and a blood cell, like where it kind of concaved at the top and the bottom, and that's where the polar ice caps were. And then it kind of went across and then back around. So it was kind of flat at the top, but then it would curve back around. And the continents were a lot smaller. The oceans were a lot more vast than you're talking. It almost looked like the magnetic field of the Earth was kind of pulling the oceans apart, I guess you would say. It was just kind of like, it looked like that.
And it was hollow in the middle.
I don't know if it was hollow. I don't know. It just kind of concaved, like almost like a blood cell. I don't remember it being hollow. I know what you're talking about, but I just remember at the polar ice caps, it concaved.
Hmm.
I saw it from a distance from the ship. I'm not sure if it was hollow in the top and the bottom or not.
Hmm. And as for space itself, Robert said that the Germans are only kind of in space because the densities overlap and it's more of a cone.
Yeah, well, that's how he explained it to me in the sense that universe is a cone, not the way it's shaped, but it's best to think of it that way. We're third density, so to get from one end of the cone, we're at the very bottom of the cone. So to get from one end to the other, it's impossible. And then you have, fifth density beings, which are kind of in the center of the cone. They still need craft, but they could make it from one end of the universe to the other. And then you have ninth density beings, and they're at the very point of the cone. and they just pretty much have to walk outside their house, and they are on the other side of the universe. So it's in relation with like space and what density you are. It's kind of like how the universe works. That's how he explained it to me.
So the universe is not as big. It's just a failure to see it from a high vantage point.
Exactly, exactly. And I remember before I joined the program, when he was still talking to me to try to get me to join the program, I asked him, I said, well, how far would it get to I said, is the universe ever growing like Einstein says at the speed of light? He said, no, it has an end. And I said, how long would it take to get to the end from Earth? And he thought about it, and he said, nearing the speed of light, 7 to 8 years. But then he said, with the proper amount of jumps, 15 minutes.
Well, I'm sure that depends on the technology and their density level, but
yeah. He was thinking it probably at fifth.
But speaking of density, as I heard that ninth density beings descend into fifth in order to be a part of the drama.
Yeah, I mean, they would show up. They would disappear on our ships. It was, I believe, like the Andromedan, or they were like the blue skin ones. Like, a lot of the
Arcturians.
blue skin beings, Arcturians. A lot of the blue skin beings were like higher up, ninth density, around ninth, and they were almost like negotiators. They could kind of come into a meeting with two warring factions that were about to fight each other, and when they walked into the room, everybody would just calm down. They were kind of seen as like negotiators, and they were kind of helping out the lower densities compared to them, to come to an agreement to seek peace.
And at one point, you actually went to the Arcturian world.
Yeah, and it was it looked like it was in a constant state of what do they call that? Twilight. I really didn't see a sun. I didn't see a star. The trees kind of went up like trunks and then kind of came out in trunks, branches like that. And it was this kind of deserty looking. It looked kind of like a slight vegetation, slight desert. But yes, there really was no night and day. I remember that. It was almost like a constant state of twilight, their world. But yes, I remember that.
But my favorite intel about the Arcturians was the way that they have a sense of humor.
Well, I mean, in the sense of that, I think what you're saying is, I remember I said to one of them, "You're taking too long. You're not helping our world. You're not, you're moving too slow." And he became me, like in front of me, and kind of mocked, like mimicked the way I was acting, like I was acting like a spoiled child. And he just formed right back to the way he was. And it was just like a way of like kind of showing me the way I was behaving, and just going to take time.
And at that level, you don't have the concept of good and evil, only efficient and inefficient.
I would say so. Yes, I would say so.
But we do have our own valuable, even as we are right now, we still have proven our worth. If nothing else, then the exports, which they said they like. They especially like some of our merchandise. Could you go over which ones they like the most?
Yeah, like children's clothes, because a lot of the beings are small. A lot of our just ETs in general. Heineken beer, I remember, was a big one. Carlsberg beer, and chocolate, like baker's chocolate, just like blocks of cocoa, like
Well,
that was like the three things I remember.
in the space station near the German world, or where?
Oh no, I mean that was from our world, but I mean as far as their trade, ETs love trade, and that space station, yeah, I mean there was many different things. I don't even remember it all, but ETs they're huge on trade. They're huge on trade. That space station was used for like negotiations and things like that between warring factions, peace treaties, meetings, but it was also used for lots of trade, yeah, from all different worlds.
What about the time looping of beings? Is it something that Pleiadians, or at least the reptilians, do to their own?
You mean as far as time travel and like the 20-year time?
Yeah, the 20-year exploit, the loops.
Is it something that they do to their own? Yeah. Oh, yes. Because, well, I mean, they live over 3,000 years, maybe even longer. Reptiles, I'm not really familiar about, but Pleiadians live over 3,000 years. And yeah, they would definitely take advantage of the time loops, and time travel is like that. It's almost like the consciousness is omnipresent, kind of like God, and it can be at more than one place at once, but there can only be one consciousness at a certain time in space, in the universe, I should say. There can only be one consciousness. So if you time travel, there could be more than one of you at a certain different parts of the universe, but you're all kind of sharing one consciousness as that's happening. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And the Navy signed a contract with the reptiles as well. So that means that at one point, at least, the Pleiadians and reptiles were both a part of Solar Warden, but maybe the reptiles are slowly being phased out.
Well, I was told in the beginning that Solar Warden was pretty negative, like reptilian, in the very beginning of the Solar Warden program, which is probably 70s, but big time the 80s, like early 80s is when it really kicked off. And Pleiadians have been taking, getting more control of Solar Warden throughout time, and they have, a majority of control over it now. But yeah, I was told that Solar Warden in the beginning was just like another kind of dark fleet.
Interesting. And did you actually ever fight Solar Warden ships or Pleiadians while in the German faction?
And the German, yeah, like we did get into some wars with like the Pleiadians. I remember that we got the like confrontations. Yeah.
Oh, so you're
ships. Yeah.
both sides. Okay. But the Draco in Nachtwaffen, this is the only, like, let's say, discrepancy, that you said that they were actually a little shorter than you.
Yeah, like I don't remember them. I don't remember great giant ones. The Royal Cast, I would say, like the Draconians, they were about my size or shorter, maybe a little shorter. They wore like robes that drug behind them. They had kind of a muzzle, they look very reptilian, and just like they just look like reptiles. And yeah, they were a bit shorter. Now the Warrior Cast and like the Working Cast, they were big. They were like 9.5 feet tall, but like the Royal Cast they were shorter.
And they got increasingly shorter as they aged. Because of their hunchback.
They kept it themselves. I mean, they kept it. You really didn't know anything about their culture. You really didn't know anything about they did. They didn't want you to know anything about them at all.
I meant because of the Skeksis hunchback and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. They kind of hunched forward, as they walked, and they kind of did that. Their head kind of showed them where to go.
That's Marshall's information. That's why. But was this the cast that at one point, maybe one of the most traumatic recalls was that they ate your own leg?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was something when I was with Robert in the office. I remember that. He said that I remember telling him they snapped my spine and they ate my legs. And he said that the reason they did that is because they didn't want you to go into shock. And he said shock is still dangerous, so they wanted my legs to be numb. He said they only wanted to scare you. He said they didn't want you to go into shock, and that's why they broke my spine first.
That might have made you catatonic and useless in the project.
Yeah, in the project, yeah. I mean, one time in shock isn't dangerous, but twice is dangerous. Hardly anybody comes back 3 times. Nobody comes back 4 times because they can do that to you. They can, torture you or put you into shock, put you in a healing tank, put you in a med bed, do it again. If it happens one time after another, you can kind of go into a catatonic state. And you won't come back.
And yeah, sorry to bring up these memories, but there was another one where one of them bit your face early into your recruitment. Bit into your face, which is why you're now a clone.
Oh yeah, that wasn't on the ship though. That was on Mars. Yeah, like Robert told me that the 3rd day I was on Mars, I was killed. Yeah, and I remember seeing like a face go over and everything just going black. And then I just kind of woke up, like opened my eyes on the ship, and I was in like kind of like this tube with a window, and there was a German nurse, a German woman, and then she kind of briefed me on what happened. And Robert explained that to me, that I was a clone, but they were able to salvage my consciousness, like my soul. They were able to like capture my soul and put it into a clone that was like my original body in every way.
Oh, but was that a reptile of the Amish indigenous to Mars, or was that one of the Nachtwaffen?
That was the indigenous to Mars.
Right,
yeah.
right. So, did you end up getting rid of your Nachtwaffen implants when you transitioned to Solar Warden?
Yes, yes. Yeah, and they have ways to remove it. They remove their tech. They have a different kind of tech, the Pleiadians, when they're on the ship compared to on their home world. I think Nachtwaffen's the same way. They put a kind of tech in you that makes you almost more disciplined and less emotional. And it's just to make it so that you're more efficient on the ships. And then when you go back to the home world, they take that tech out and then they give you new tech.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the details of how they got it out because it kind of ran through your bloodstream, was every fiber of your being pretty much. But I remember when you went into like healing tanks, the tech would kind of float out of your body. It would sink down to the bottom of the tank because it kind of liquefied you and put you back together. It's kind of how a healing tank works. But I mean,
It
as far
printed.
as them taking out the tech, I don't remember how.
Interesting that they did. So you also were. You only mentioned this once, but it really stuck with me that part of the reason why you were sought after in the Pleiadian world, and as well maybe why you had some affinity with the Draconians in Nachtwaffen, was that, I mean, they had it with you, but was because you yourself are a reptilian soul.
Well, Robert said I was a splice soul of, and that's not very common by itself. And he said I was Lyran and reptilian. And yeah, and to be to have any kind of reptilian and be genetically compatible with them is very uncommon. Like
Extremely
like it
uncommon.
doesn't happen. Yeah, he said it doesn't happen. He said, yeah, I was a variable, as they said.
Hmm. Interesting. And some of the Germans were raised by reptilians, which is something I never heard of. But is it on their home planets?
On their home world, but I think a lot of the Dark Fleet and everything, Nachtwaffen, they're kind of maybe they're picked for that at a young age to and yeah, they have to kind of interact with the reptiles. Like that's why that one first class petty officer was so upset when I poked that reptile in the eye. And I asked Robert, I said, are they raised by those things? And he said, yes. He seemed like very close to it.
And before, in one of our interviews, you said that they store the souls in stasis or whatever, even in armor or swords. But then I kind of read between the lines that that is not simply to prevent the soul from, that it's presumably an Nordic or something enemy, to prevent it from the reincarnation cycle, but also in combination with AI to help the actual piece of armor or whatever equipment that it is on. And proof of that is the incident where it actually saved your life when you found yourself ambushed by Mantids.
Well, yeah, I mean, they do have a consciousness, and it has to do with artificial intelligence needs a consciousness to be able to interact. You know, a soul has to be able to interact with the AI because it's such an advanced technology, so it needs to have like a consciousness in it. And yeah, like the one time I was being, well, it was reptiles, oh, mantises. It was like it was a full on attack. The native reptiles, the native mantises, and yeah, I came to like a cliff and it was very high, stories very high, and I when I was about to jump off because I had no choice, and I said when I jump off I'm gonna shatter my legs. Make sure you get me home, and it said affirmative, and I just jumped off the cliff, and when I hit I rolled, and I knew I like blew out both my legs, and the suit was able to just get me back and take me back.
Well, so broken bones at all, basically.
Yeah, broken
Um,
bones and all. The ship just like did it automatically for me after I told it. I mean,
you,
the suit did it for me automatically when I told it to beforehand.
yeah. You probably had to, because otherwise it was made. I mean, you overrode the protocol or something.
Exactly.
But in regards to our bringing up in Atlanteans and so on, I think that you found out that initially we were refugees from Marduk and Mars, and that both of those were destroyed by reptilians.
Yes, yes. Like we were in a war with the Draconian Empire, and yeah, they blew them both up. And every time it kind of annoyed the higher density beings, and they put a stop to it basically at
Hmm.
Earth. Yeah, they intervened because blowing up an entire world is something they don't tolerate.
Yeah, and they are aware of how depraved they are, and in an effort to counteract that, at the end of the reptilians, I'm talking about, maybe it goes for other darker species, but at the end of their life, to sort of atone for their evil or wrongdoing, they sacrifice themselves, undergo
Oh
sort of.
yeah, when they get old enough, yeah, when they become very old, yeah, they basically kill them once they get to like a certain age. But I mean, there are others that, I mean, they can put tech in their body to live a certain a longer period of time and everything like that. But yeah, they eventually, when they get to like just a certain age where they're considered like decrepit, they're sacrificed, they're killed. Yes.
Yeah, and the reptiles can't even be on Earth for more than 2 days, which is why we don't see them.
Well, I mean, I remember even the Pleiadians, they didn't like to be on Earth for more than 48 hours because of just the, the toxins and everything like that will start to affect them. And yeah, I'm sure the reptiles are the same way. Yeah, they live within the Earth and it's not the same. But yeah, I mean, 48 hours is the most they like to be on the surface of the Earth.
Hmm. And while we're talking about these, let's say, darksiders, the elongated heads that you've seen match the description of the ones that were found in Peru, I think, that they have many skulls of, that had red hair and big jaws.
Yeah, when I was in the caverns with Aquino and I was playing classical guitar for him, one of them just kind of came out of a hall and stayed close to a wall, and it looked like he had like a red scarf, like a silk scarf, kind of wrapped tightly around his cone head. But I think it might have been his hair. Just his hair was kind of tightly wrapped around his head. His eyes were very big, blue, but he had kind of had like rings of like sunken in skin around the eyes, and his jaw was very broad. And as I was playing, he was kind of like clenching his jaw and like moving back and forth his head, but as he still watched me, like he was kind of like doing that, like back and forth as I was playing guitar. And yeah, that was one of the things the guys told me in the barracks before I joined the program. You see them as well, and they like our classical art. Their average IQ is 160, so they're very intelligent, can get up to like over 300. They're genetically close enough to us to be considered cannibals because they eat us.
Wow.
And they can because they can have offspring with us, but they're kind of like a mule, like when you breed a horse and a donkey together, like the offspring is sterile. So they can
Hmm.
have offspring with us, but the offspring is sterile.
Hmm. And I know it sounds, I mean, it's gonna maybe sound like you're tooting your own horn, but it has to be mentioned. The short story about when the Queen of the Pleiadians was attacking you and the way that conversation unfolded, which resulted in their intervention. Could you please cover that?
Well, it was mother that was attacking me, like an elder female.
Oh,
Is
it's not the Queen. Sorry.
Yeah, it was mother that was attacking me because I don't know. It was Robert explained to me like you did something to them, like that they liked you. She was obsessed with you, and she didn't want to let you go, and she attacked me. And they're about as strong as us, the women. So I was like holding her, and I kind of knocked her down, and I was pinning her down, and she was screaming and trying to attack me. And I said something like, are you going to help me, or should I just break her legs and hobble her? I said it, and two warrior cats came up and eventually grabbed her and took her away. And I said to the king, I said, that's what's wrong with your people. I said, you don't help anyone when they need help. You just stand there and you stare. They kind of stare with like their mouths open, and their mouths were all open, and they were like very wide eyed staring at me. And I said, that's what's happening to my world right now. I said, I said, if there was a man raping a woman and two other men walk by, and not only did they not try to stop the rape, but they just stood there and watched, wouldn't they be just as guilty as the man committing the rape? That they would. And I said, well, that's all you're doing right now. You're just standing there and watching my world be raped, and you're not doing anything to help. And I said, now that you know this, will be upon you and upon your children, so you must help us now. And he said, you're right, we'll help. And yeah, that's whenever Robert even told me that's whenever they came to the agreement to help Earth. They weren't going to get involved until I told them that.
And it's not like they would do the work for us, but they would just help lift the boat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I said there's others like me, and I said just get the boot off our neck. You know, like that's all we need. Get the boot off our neck and help us up, and we'll do the rest. But that's all I'm asking for.
That's great. And going back to the duality, which I think you said on most planets is something else, like the what was it, female divinity or something?
Yeah, like a divine feminine, divine masculine.
Right. You said that whenever human gets their eagle, meaning they get to colonel in the Navy and no, captain in the Navy and colonel everywhere else, that they are read into not just the duality, but also the SSP and the adrenochrome, which would that mean that everything we see on TV is pantomime as a result, because they are all aware of this satanic stuff?
Well, he said that they're aware, they have to choose a side of the duality of Earth, the Anglo-Saxon or the Satanists. And I said, which side do most choose? And he said, Satanists. And I said, why? He said, you get more money and power and it's easier. And he said, but that's changing. And he said that it's just told to them in passing. It's not like they sit down in a meeting and like see a movie. He's like, oh yeah, by the way, you know, we have a secret space program and there's adrenochrome mines. And he said it's just kind of told to them like that. They're made aware that this exists, but it's not really like they're told great detail. And he said that it's very compartmentalized after you get your Roman Eagle, like colonel or captain in the Navy. Like, you know, the ranks below really don't know anything. Once you get to your Eagle or you become admiral or general, like those are almost like two different militaries. It's kind of like how he explained it to me.
And about Mike Pence, you also saw a third Mike Pence. I mean, a third person from that failed breeding program. In addition to Robert and the Mike Pence that we know, you saw what was Robert's brother, maybe?
No. He was just came from that time.
Oh, okay.
And, Robert explained it to me. He said that he had a brother that had access to time travel. This person I know. But yeah, I saw him at the VA, and then somebody came up to him where I was at the gym at the VA, and then another person came up to him and said, "Hey, you're from the future, aren't you?" And he said, "Hey, how did you know that?" And he said, "I used to work with you guys in the military." And then they were joking around, and the man that confronted him said, "Don't look at me. I'm on the side of the Anglo-Saxon." He said that, like in the gym. And the guy is not really a neighbor, but he lives in my neighborhood, and I talked to him. But I mean, I never really confronted him with it. I didn't see any point, but he looks just like that. He looks just, you know, he's got the white hair, the black eyebrows.
It's crazy. And he gave you some insight about the future, about how you can heal yourself, and about the best energy source.
Oh, yeah, he said waterfalls are extremely are very healing. Something about the frequency of it, the way the water falls on you. He said it can cure most diseases, even like, you know, stage 1 cancer. And, you know, when things get too out of hand, he even said it himself. When people get stage 4 cancer, it's like you need a med bed. It's like there's nothing else that can really save you. But and he also told me that parasites are responsible for almost all the diseases in the world, and things like ivermectin. The reason why they fought it so hard in the news and everything else, because they don't want people to know that things like cancer and everything like that usually comes from parasites. And parasites are almost like an in between, I guess you would say, like a
physical and astral.
Yeah, physical and astral, in the sense that lower fourth density, lower fourth astral can actually kind of go through you through parasites. So having like parasites, that's kind of like what they're used for. It's not good to have it. And it's not bad to take ivermectin every now and again, or any kind of dewormer to get rid of all the worms out of your body, because he said Americans are riddled with worms, and that's like a major reason for our diseases.
I can speak for myself that ivermectin actually saved my face, because it would have been lobster red right now if not for that. But about the energy source, he told you to not invest in anything but a certain one.
Well, not anything but he said helium. He said helium is going to be very
Wait, wasn't it hydrogen?
Oh, hydrogen. I'm sorry. Yeah, hydrogen. Hydrogen is going to be a very like like the fuel of the future. It's what people are going to be using for most things in the future. He said is with hydrogen. Yes, hydrogen
Well,
power.
so ditch the other ones because they're gonna fall by the
Yeah,
wayside.
like windmill and solar and things like that. They're not going to be too big on that. I'm sure there's going to be other forms of like fuel sources besides hydrogen, but yeah, I mean, that's what he told me. He said it's going to be a big part of the future, hydrogen.
Hmm. So in the original timeline, like you said, the Western nations were invaded under the guise of climate refugees, but there were Satanists, and the West, in Robert's words, was raped and murdered. At least his family was, and falsely accused, and so on. But in this one, even though they averted that possibility, it's still not gonna be, like you said, a gumdrops and lollipops. There's still gonna be a war starting with U.S. declaring one on Mexico.
Yeah, he told me the United States is going to declare war on Mexico, and I kind of said, why? And he said, well, the Mexico has declared war on the United States since the 1960s, and I said, what do you mean? And he said they've cleared out their prisons and their insane asylums about once every 10 years because there's just too many of them. They can't afford them, and they push them in the United States. He said that's an act of war. He said, so the United States, yeah, will declare war on Mexico, and will push the Mexican people down to the Yucatan Peninsula where Mexico bottlenecks. He said that's a border we can protect. He said no matter what scenario they ran through Project Looking Glass, Mexico will invade the United States because the border is just too vast. And then he said, and this is supposed to be distant in the future, I guess, that we're going to take back our original Indo-European borders, which is like a lot of the Middle East, a lot of South Asia, all of India. And I said, well, don't the people fight back? And he said that Mexico was pretty much the example. He said that Mexico loses 1/3 of their population, and that once the world sees that, like the technology that he said Kruger gave it to us, where it's in a sense that you can go back a couple weeks and refight a battle. You can go back in time a couple weeks and keep on refighting it and refighting it. Say you need more supplies here, more troops there. You can just keep on replaying the battle until you eventually win it. And he said that they have that technology from Kruger, which is a corporation from another universe where Germany won World War II. That's how he explained it to me.
Mm-hmm. So because of how cemented this probability is, no matter what we're going to do, we are going to see Mexico, lose 1/3 of supposedly mostly men. That means all the men of fighting age, or 1/3, whereas USA will lose a negligible or a small amount.
Yeah, I asked if we suffer casualties, and he said some, and then I said, what about Mexico? And he said they lose 1/3 of their population.
Right. So the way the US wins is through the certain faction that doesn't have the best reputation, but you say they have humanity's interest.
Yes, and like I said, nothing's a monolith. I mean, they don't want to be a part of the Draconian Empire, and I think this is like a Germany from a different universe as well, as far as what he explained it to me. Like Kruger, the corporation Kruger is from a different universe, and they're like the only ones that we know besides the AI itself that knows how to go to different universes. And they're the only ones that have that technology to go into like different universes. And I believe he said there's only 8 that we know of right now. 8
Universes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know of any other, let's say, alternate timelines like that have intervened with our dealings other than the Krugers from the reality where Germany won the Second World War officially.
Yeah. That I don't. Besides AI, and they were also assisted by like the Nordics. That's how they created it. It was like they worked together. Like the Germans from this other universe worked. They immediately took the help that the Nordics were willing to give the Germans during World War II, and they immediately took their help. While Germans in our world, they were only offered like karmic weapons, is kind of like how they refer them to, or if they were to drop a bomb on Berlin, the bomb would go back up and blow the plane up. They wanted more, offensive technology, so the Greys were willing to give it to them, and the Greys worked for the reptiles, so they got involved with the reptiles that way.
Mm-hmm. And the dark-skinned people that we're supposed to protect were exterminated in the fallen timeline that Robert is from. and that's part of why
Yeah,
it fell.
yeah. Well, when I when they said that they interbred and they took the lighter skinned people and they put them in Asia, and I said, what do they do with the darker skinned people? And he said they killed them all off. That's what he said.
Well, and so that means that the Middle East and India is slated to fall into the hands again of the Slavs and the Anglo-Saxons.
Yes, and he said all of India, and I said why? And he said because it was ours at one time and it was taken from us, so we're taking it back. And I said, well, where do they go? He said the world's a big place. He said we'll move them somewhere else, and we'll help them. Is how he put it. He said we'll help them.
Mm-hmm. And he said that in the timeline that is inevitable, that old corporations will be, or a lot of them will be out of business. But in order to keep the continuity and the infrastructure, we'll still make use of them.
Yeah, like he said that places like Amazon and everything like that. He said that we want their infrastructure. Like those corporations are going to go out of business, but we're going to keep their trucks and their underground tunnels and loading docks and everything like that. We're going to keep all these different. We're going to keep the infrastructure, but yeah, most of these corporations are going to be a thing of the past. That's how he put it to me.
Mm-hmm. But despite Robert's, affinity with the Anglo-Saxons, he admitted that the English language, which is, from best I can tell, the most widespread in the whole of Breakaways, trillions of people speak it. It is a slave language, and that it is going to be phased out on Earth.
Yes, he said that English was a slave language and it would be replaced by an introductory into telepathy, is how he put it. A language that would be kind of like an introductory to introduce you and how to use telepathy, how to have the proper mindset.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the text, I mean, the alphabet and the scripts in the Pleiadian world also were more elegant or efficient at conveying information than ours.
Yes, and even telepathy itself, it was more direct. Yeah, and like they did have a written language. They did speak a language, but it was mostly like for their ceremonies and stuff like that. They rarely spoke aloud, but when they did, it was like more of a ceremonial thing.
Mm-hmm. So one of the ways we can tell that we are on this timeline, I mean, one of the many, but there's so many, but is the impending 10 days of darkness that might seem frightening, but it's actually necessary for them to take certain steps.
Well, yeah, I mean, he said that we're going to go off Tesla power, which is actually kind of ET power, unlimited free energy, is how he said it. And he said a lot of that 10 days of darkness would be us turning over to Tesla power. But he said it might not be one day. It might just be an easy transition. He said, but that's at the worst like the worst scenario. It would take 10 days. It's probably going to be more like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, and that's also when the fact that we're not alone is going to be officialized, and we're going to see footage of, brothers and sisters in space.
Well, he acted like that they weren't ready yet, but then he said like I don't know. He said that could change. He felt that the military of the world felt like the people weren't ready for that yet. But he said that it would involve, seeing a lot of these, public executions and things of politicians and celebrities. That would be another big part of it as well, the 10 days of darkness.
Right. Where all you're going to see is the tribunals and the executions of the wrongdoers. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And Tesla himself, you were told, was a channeler, so can't take credit for all he did.
Yeah. He told me he channeled, and I've heard people say he was from Venus, but I'm not sure about that. But he did say, yeah, Tesla was a channeler, and he got his technology from ETs.
Interesting. But currency will not be replaced by digital completely, right? There still be a physical component.
Yeah, he said, well, gold backed up by gold, and yeah, he said that all the world's gold is in the catacombs of the Vatican, and because we're not ready yet for a complete cashless society, or even that. We still are going to rely off of economy that's based off of precious metal kind of currency.
Right. So let's close it with the other prediction that he made that has already turned true. That's maybe, more imminent, which is the fact that when we see conflicts in Israel pop up, that's when you'll know that this reset is going to close in.
Yeah, and he even said he said that the whole Q thing was real in the beginning, but then it would go away for 4 or 5 months and then come back, and that's not real, but it doesn't matter because it's already started by then. And he said that he was saying like all these catchphrases you hear, like Israel will be last, enjoy the show. It's all just a big show. Get your popcorn. He was saying things like that to me, and smiling almost like an inside joke. And I really didn't know what he was talking about at the time, but he knew like I would figure it out.
You must have lost count of the amount of predictions that have come to pass.
Well, yeah, I mean, it didn't seem to happen exactly the way he said it, but he did say, he said that all these politicians, a majority of these celebrities, a majority of these politicians are gone, and that mass technology is a lot more advanced than we think. He told me about deepfake technology, and yeah, he said that there's a lot of, it's just a show. He said a lot of these things you're not going to notice it at first because they're going to put on a big show.
One example of that show is the way that Tom Hanks is actually dead and run by a clone, or is just deepfaked.
Well, yeah, he said the last movie he would do would be a Navy movie, and I believe that was the one from the Apple TV where he played a captain in the Navy. And he told me about the Elvis movie, and he said his brother would be in a fat suit, and that's why he did where he plays the Colonel in the Elvis Presley movie, the manager for Elvis Presley, and he said his brother sounds just like him, and his brother's going to be, they're going to deep fake or they're going to put makeup on him or things like that. But it's going to be actually his brother who sounds just like him to do his roles.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And this density lock that we have here, it might be, I mean, it's also what makes mind wiping even possible, because if not for the third density, we would automatically not be able to forget, like even past lives, but also these forced incarnations in the SSP.
I don't know if we're going to remember it if we do ascend in the fifth, if we are going to all of a sudden remember all these past memories. But I do know that like fifth density beings, their school, basically like the Pleiadian children, going to school would be remembering your past lives. So anything you ever did in a past life, you would know how to do again. And that's kind of like how the schooling works. That's how their education works. They remember their past lives. But I think it does have to be like kind of taught. I don't think I'm sure we'll have a better grasp of our past lives, but it helps to have like a teacher to teach you how to remember your past lives, I would say.
Right. Yeah. And the first step is removing yourself from the trauma of just this realm, because like you said, you couldn't even cope with it until you had some kind of a footing of your own here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's something to look forward to. And also ego doesn't even exist in fifth, so which apparently ego was the cause for the fall of the Atlanteans. So if we're going directly in fifth, we might be even bigger than the Atlanteans.
Yes, but maybe, yeah. But they do have an ego when they're, I mean, they as children and things like that, it does. And when they're going through puberty, but yes, by adulthood, they lose their ego. But when they're kids, they're still almost like kids of Earth. They get in the fights and everything else, but it's something they lose as they become older.
Right. So in closing, do you think that the Ascension will involve a solar event like you were shown, or is it an individual thing, or is it like they coincide basically?
I think they coincide, and I think it will be. I think that's why they were showing that. I'm not 100%, but I don't think it's going to be individual. I think it's just, we're all going to ascend to this next density. I don't. I think it has to do with the world, with the people, and with the star itself. I think it's something that all has to kind of come together and become one, and then that's how it happens.
Yep, I agree. Right. So yeah, I'm glad we could catch up, and it's been too long. And I'm looking forward to your book. Can you give us maybe information on where people can find you and dig up on your old stuff?
Yes, my website is daryldjames.com, DARYL, D is in Delta, James.com, and you can see my old videos there.
And you're still in the process of writing, right? Because
yes, I'm still in the process. Yes.
It would be invaluable to put these in order and, if possible, include as many of these details.
Of course, yes.
Cool. So yeah, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.
All right, thanks, Daniel.